What can investors learn from entrepreneurs? Today on Off the Sidelines. Hey, Emily Foote, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing okay for 2020. I'm glad you're here. I know you from technically reporting on your founding days, but this has changed recently. You are in a relatively new role. Am I not lying?
You are not lying. I'm 6 months in on the opposite side of the table on an investor role at Osage Venture Partners.
We're gonna pull up that title then. Exactly that. So start. Well, congrats, I suppose, on the role. I should say.
Thank you. Thanks.
You've made this transition. Something that we are thinking a lot about at Technically and via the lens of our Off the Sidelines podcast and investor education podcast is the dynamics between investor and entrepreneur. And one of them that comes up a lot for us is this idea that, the entrepreneur may be this brilliant idea with a product or solution, but the wise sage investor has this much broader landscape view. And so it often feels like there's a dynamic there where the investor is the wiser soul, which may be true in some sense, but we have a hunch that there are lessons that entrepreneurs have that some investors who perhaps come from very important finance backgrounds but might not have could grab. So I wanted to start off by hearing you, one, if you think that's total bullshit or not, but if you think there's something to be said there, what are like some examples of things you are taking from your entrepreneur days that you're hoping to bring into your investment career?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there definitely is a bit of truth to that. I think
a bit of truth. I'll take that.
bit of truth. So the interesting thing, that I understood on the entrepreneur side and now see at the investor side is entrepreneurs have a ton of information that's extremely hard to do diligence on from the investor side. And now I'm recognizing that even more. So as an entrepreneur, your risks, your frustrations, your product maturity, your setbacks, the internal dynamics that, even the best diligence is process, could really fail to uncover that. And I'm hoping that my experience as an entrepreneur now and the investor, since I know all those details and nuances, I'll be able to help surface them better to make better investment risks and really understand kind of the questions since I lived that day-to-day life that the entrepreneur is. But, I think when you think about the power dynamics on the other side, the investor, I would like now that we all think, that I'm on the wise side, but, I think there's some fallacy there, but they do have, many more options of where to put their money than maybe an entrepreneur does from a perspective where to get their money. And
Right.
So, that's where I think the power dynamic comes in. They can always walk away. So I think from an entrepreneur perspective, they have to realize they even in that dynamic, they still have the power to make the investor feel like they may be missing out. So they can think about, time is short or the interest is really high. And if you miss out, it could be, a mark on your reputation, you as the investor. And so the entrepreneur still has, that power from that fear of missing out of making the investor want to stick with them, even though the investor has so many more options. Does that make sense?
It does. And you're hitting on something that I want to touch on, but I'm going to break character for a moment and do a logistical note. You had headphones on a moment ago. Can we return to those? Can you put them back on?
So but they weren't connected to the computer?
I see.
I can, they're not here, but I can, if you wait a minute, I can see if I have the ones I can plug in.
Yeah, that'd be great. I apologize. I lost that thread. Well, and we'll it's a great segue chance. We're gonna do like that. We're doing it live. Look at this happening. But I'll say one thing that has been true across all of our reporting on this podcast series and beyond. Emily, yeah, you can keep doing your thing if you're looking for headphones.
I can't find them.
Okay, all right, that's fine. We're doing it. That's okay. All right. We're going to make it work. No, we're going to make it work. So so well, then let me set that aside and go back to what you were beginning to touch on there, which is this concept of power dynamics, because there are those, and you are interesting to me for lots of reasons, of course, but we reported on a lot of different founders who I always would I recognize a lot of people had had a different skill set to go to any kind of investment relationship, and there are those who were clearly savvy and a good handle on their market. And then I certainly have interviewed through the years founders with a really strong idea, but I'm not sure if I thought they had a degree of savvy that just is necessary to combat power dynamics. I guess I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about how much that is rolling through your head because you have a different kind of experience than perhaps someone who's come through a finance background, who I've interviewed. Wonderful, really brilliant people who with a finance background I think are like crucial for investment in PE because they bring a discipline that is different than folks without that background. But I think they often miss the power dynamics that are happening. And I wonder, that's got to be on your mind. You know the feeling is different on the entrepreneur side. Is that something that you're bringing to your investment career?
Yeah, absolutely. I did not have a finance background. I was a teacher for 5 years in Atlanta and Southeast DC and North Philly, and then I practiced special education law. And so I had zero finance background. And this was in 2011 when we started. And there was information out there about, startup, but not as much as there is today in terms of educating the entrepreneur so that power dynamic is shortened or not as acute. But I knew how to surround myself with people who did have business building experience. So we merged, before we did our Series A, we merged with a company in San Francisco who was founded by Paul Friedman, who had multiple experiences, both starting and selling companies. And that helped from a perspective of lessening that power dynamic. Mm-hmm. And now on the investor side, and this is a principle that Osage has, and now I've adopted, is when we look at who to invest in, first and foremost, we're looking at, are they business builders? Not necessarily do they have a finance background so that they can go head to head with us in the negotiation, but have they done this before? And if they have, then that will set them up for success in doing it again because of that pattern recognition, and they've lived, through the battles of starting a company before. If they don't have that, we do like to look, like you mentioned, like what is their deep expertise in the industry that they're going into, and then secondarily, who are they surrounding themselves with, and if they're people who have experience, or the advisors they have, or people on their team, then that'll balance out the fact that they hadn't done this in the past.
Sorry, I've never had so much process in mid-interview, but I just also wanted to note, I realized I didn't flag for you. If you don't, can you have your iPhone on airplane mode for that additional recording? Because otherwise your recording get interrupted by any inbound stuff.
Good idea.
Wow, look at it. Look at everyone, we're just letting people see behind the scenes,
Yeah, okay. It is on plane mode.
Thank you. And the recording's still going?
It's still going.
See, I want the people to know that when we do the live interview, we're not lying. It's not for stage. This is really the live interview. This is the real thing. We're giving you a behind the scenes look. Do you think that investors should treat or recognize first-time founders differently than more experienced founders, particularly in the investment pitch? And that doesn't make sense. I think what I'm thinking about is, as an investor, you don't really necessarily care if they're a good pitcher. You're trying to find, is this someone who's going to grow the best business? And sometimes, which shows up in the data a lot, we as humans are easily deceived by someone who's a better presenter, even if they're not trying to get a job as a presenter. And I wonder if investors could be tricked by someone with a more savvy pitch as opposed to the first-time founder. And that's an example of a dynamic that I think is perhaps understandably lost in someone who hasn't been in the room to go pitch and felt the the nerves that might be unrelated entirely to whether their business is sound. Or you could tell me that no savvy investor would ever be duped by that. I don't know if I would believe it, but is that an example of a dynamic first-time founders when they would be pitching you, and if you feel like you would look at them differently?
I think you do look at them differently because you know they don't have that vast experience to draw upon when talking about what they're going to do in the future. But that's where diligence comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And at least I've only been in one spot as an investor, but at Osage, the diligence is so deep. So we're in the middle of diligence with a company that they are first-time founders.
Mm-hmm.
And you just dive in deep. Not only do we dive in deep because they're first-time founders, I mean, we do it with all founders, but also because we've never met them in person,
right.
which,
Right.
a lot. And so we do multiple personal reference calls, multiple customer calls, partner calls, et cetera, for references to really figure out, is this an individual or is this a team that's going to be able to build that, long-standing successful company?
And so that also might be obviously the difference between a pretty established investment firm, and if someone's doing angel investing, even in a smaller angel network, or certainly if they're doing it on their own, there's a degree of due diligence that is going to be a real variety there. But I guess I hear in that answer, even if it's already built in, it's pretty crucial for investors to be reminded you are not investing in someone who's the best presenter. That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for the best business, and how well they can navigate a PowerPoint deck or whatever might be a symptom or a consequence, but it's not the point.
Right. And there's a lot of times that in our space that we try to take people off script just to see, how are they going to react? What kind of leader person are they when they're not following a script that they've probably practiced a ton before coming in, to ease their nerves of going in front of investors to, get that investment that means everything to them, to take their business to the next level.
We're running out of time, but something that I wouldn't have originally asked it like this, but what came to mind is, are you an investor you would have wanted as a founder?
So that's a great question. So my concept for what a good investor was built on my experience, and also just what I heard kind of war stories from other folks, and war stories about micromanaging investors that were constantly trying to tell you what decisions you make, when founders make hundreds of decisions a week and they would jump in and out. So these are these war stories that I heard. So my experience with investors compared to those war stories was wonderful. We had quarterly board meetings. We talked there. They were insightful. They were smart. They were thoughtful during those board meetings. But I didn't hear much from them in between those meetings, except when we were going through an acquisition. And I thought that was great. And it was wonderful. And then I started at Osage, and they are incredibly active investors. And at first I thought, oh, wow, are we those investors that I heard about, that were these micromanagers that, didn't let the entrepreneur breathe and, try things, fail, try again, meet successes, et cetera. But as I've gotten more into it, and I'm sitting on a few boards now, it's actually pretty amazing. They, at Osage, they have the board meetings. They have monthly board meetings with some. Every week they are talking to, I'm talking about our four partners, and now myself on boards, the CEOs, weekly. We take a board seat, an observer seat. We have events to bring the CEOs together. We have something called an acceleration plan that the minute that we put in and close the deal of financing, we have a 30, 60, 90-day plan where both sides have tasks to make sure we're setting the company up for success, so on and so forth. And at first, like I said, I was like, oh man, this is a lot. It's really exhausting for the entrepreneur, but it's actually more like a guide on the side as opposed to a micromanager. And when I look back retrospectively, I really wish that I had more of that hands-on approach from our investors, even though I had, wonderful experience with them. because I think it really would have accelerated our successes faster.
Is your vantage point now that one is genuinely better for all, or even for a type of company or founding team, or is there, there's a hammer and there's a screwdriver and you got to decide the tool?
That's a good question. We are Series A investors,
right?
And so it's at this, inflection point in the company's life cycle of where you're starting to think, okay, we've had this team that has been this gritty, hands-on, everybody's wearing multiple hats, and now we need to start to take it to the next level. And so I think when there's those inflection points, you really want people who have seen this multiple times, have had pattern recognition, have networks of people that can help fill the gaps of where you may not have expertise, or can help you have introductions to customers and partners, et cetera. And so at those inflection points, I think you want the type of investor, that Osage is, which is much more hands-on. But there may be other times in the life cycle of a company where you'd prefer more of a hands-off.
So Emily, before I go to help close this out, I do want to know, though, again, are you an investor you wish you would have had as a founder?
Great question. I hope so.
All right. I'll allow it. Something I want to make sure we hit on throughout Off the Sidelines, as we had in the first season, is addressing the really yawning gap in both racial, gender, and frankly a range of representations, both on who is doing the deal making and in whom they are making those deals. You've been a female founder navigating investment and seeing disproportionately lack of gender representation. We know there's even a larger racial gap, particularly when we're talking about Black American representation. I wonder if from your entrepreneurship days into investment, if you have any early insights, noting you're still quite early in your investment career, so all asterisks aside, are there any smaller examples or lessons or thoughts you have on what needs to change about investment to address these enormous gaps in representation and impact investment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and obviously a critical one. I think top of funnel is paramount here. So we at Osage and every other VC firm should be measuring how many diverse entrepreneurs are you seeing, so you can keep pushing those numbers up. And I think you can learn a lot from what business builders and CEOs are doing on that front, of how they're ensuring that their talent pipeline is similarly stacked, so that they are continuing to build a diverse team. There's a couple firms in our portfolio. One is Malback, another company is one Malback, one is Noodle Partners. And in their board meetings, they have a slide in each of their decks talking about, ensuring that talent pipeline is at the top of the funnel is full, and investors need to do the same thing. There's a great firm in Philly. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's called Diverse Force. It was founded by an individual. His name is Suleiman Rahman. It's a human capital firm, and they do leadership development with Penn, but they also have a recruiting arm. And in that arm, they designed this product which takes cues from something called the Rooney Rule, and that's in the NFL. And the rule basically says that you need 2 or more diverse candidates on your slate when you're filling a role. And so they help companies do that specifically for the roles around $100,000, $150,000 salaries. So you have this middle management role that then, you have this pipeline of talent for your higher leadership roles. And as an entrepreneur, I didn't follow that to a T, but, I was a woman co-founder with two males of color. So we naturally, hired a much more diverse team, and the impact is clear. I mean, the stats around diverse teams are clear to all of us. And so I think investors, need to do something like what Diverse Force is helping companies do with their talent pipeline. We just need to do it with our deal flow.
Well said. Emily, we're over time, so I got to let you go. Thank you so much for having a conversation. This has been Emily Foote, principal at Osage Ventures, former founder. Thanks so much for a conversation, giving us some lessons on what investors can learn from entrepreneurs. I hope to talk to you again soon, Emily. I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Chris. It was wonderful to be here.
All right, we'll see you.